Let's have a look at Game 4 of the World Chess Championship match 2024 in Singapore. What an incredible match it is so far. In Game 1, the reigning world champion Ding Liren managed to shock the entire chess community with a very impressive victory with the black pieces. And after a solid draw in Game 2, well, Gukesh managed to strike back with a very impressive victory with the white pieces. And now, after a rest day, it is Game 4, the players are fresh again. Let's see what is going to happen in this game. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, make sure to do so that you don't miss any of the action what is happening in Singapore. Well, in this game, Game 4, Ding Liren is playing with the white pieces. In his first game with the white pieces, he opened with 1 e4. Was a little surprise. But for this occasion, he goes back to the move he has much more experience with. 1 knight f3, black goes for d5, e3, knight f6. And here again, I think Ding is the one who is dropping a small surprise. As I mean, there are a lot of different ways of playing here, but I'm not sure Gukesh really expected this move b3. So we have a quite calm game here, like white is intending to probably fianchetto his bishop, and he's not going to challenge the center immediately. But on the other hand, black has a lot of options here. He decided here to bring out the bishop to f5. It's a very logical move and pretty much in the spirit of a Slav opening, when you place the pawns on light squares and then the bishop is much better placed outside the pawn chain. Well, here, interesting move order, as a lot of people would automatically play here the move bishop b2. But Ding goes for the move bishop e2. What is his idea? Well, if black follows up here with the move e6, then white can try here this move, knight h4. And this bishop, I mean, it's not endangered, can always drop back to g6. But here white has definitely something to play for. He can grab the bishop pair, and that's some long-term type of advantage for white. Anyway, Gukesh understands that. He is not going to play e6 immediately. He played here the move h6, which is not a developing move, but it does ensure that in case the bishop comes under an attack, it can always drop back to h7. So these plans with knight h4, they no longer make a lot of sense. Now Ding comes up with another interesting idea, which is not new, but rarely seen at top level. He goes for the move bishop a3. As I said before, normally this bishop goes to b2, controlling the dark squares on this long diagonal. That's the ideal square for the bishop to go to. But here the main point of placing the bishop on a3 is that it's much harder now for black to play a move like e6, because it does allow bishop takes f8, and whichever way you're going to recapture, either the king or with the rook, black will no longer be allowed to castle kingside. So after bishop a3, black has to come up with some sort of original solution. And well, Gukesh played here this move, knight bd7, rock solid and absolutely fine. Castling kingside, and now after this move e6, the bishops are coming off the board, bishop takes bishop, and here black is able to recapture with a knight. Of course, the knight is not greatly placed on f8, but after the move c4, the knight just returns to d7, after which black is absolutely okay. And after knight c3 castling kingside, black has managed to complete his development. He can put a pawn on c6, he can move the queen, the rooks are connected. Looks like black is rock solid here. Now, interestingly, there was one earlier game, an online game during pandemic between Wesley So and Anish Giri. In that game, Wesley So played here the move d4. And indeed, we do have a typical Slav type of structure after something like c6. Position is very even, but Ding had a complete different idea in mind. Rather than placing the pawn on d4, first he captures the pawn on d5. C takes d5, and of course, black is going to take back with the e pawn. Now, of course, it's still possible to play a move like d4, but as said, white has different plans. And played here the move b4. It's an interesting idea. So preventing black from easily carrying out this move c7, c5. You're controlling that squaring and you don't want to create an isolated pawn. So c5 is not black's idea. Black instead played here the move c6. And now white's main plan is revealed, as white, rather than placing a pawn on d4, brings the knight to d4. Interesting idea. With a knight on d4, you're attacking the bishop. The bishop, as expected, goes back to h7, far away, cannot come under an attack by any of white's pieces. But how is white gonna follow up? Well, that is the big question. It does look like a typical queen's gambit decline type of structure, Carlsbad structure, where white is going to launch his b pawn with the move b4, b5, challenging the pawn on c6. But whenever you do that, black is always able to respond with c6, c5. So I think white will really carefully decide when to push the b pawn, or maybe just keep that pawn on b4 to secure that beautiful outpost for the knight on d4. But having said that, the knight on d4 looks great. On the other hand, it's not really clear what white then is going to do. Well, Ding played the move queen b3. So now his rooks are connected. The queen is going to support the march of the b pawn. It's indirectly targeting the pawn on d5, which is now still defended. But now things are getting interesting. As Gukesh played here the move knight e5. He's activating his knight from d7. It's much better placed on e5. And he's taking advantage of the fact that, well, white didn't place a pawn on d4. So the knight does look quite stable here. But it can be kicked away. I mean, it's a very important moment, as in the game, Ding continued here with the move a4. But it's definitely possible to play something like f4 to question that knight on e5. And definitely you should not jump into white's position. In that case, white can play knight a4 and the knight on d3 is going to be lost. So that's not a good plan. Why did Gukesh play this move knight e5 if his knight can immediately be targeted by the f-pawn? I guess that his plan was to provoke white to play that move. So he would probably just go back with a knight to d7 and claim that a move like f4 is like a long-term weakening move. Like, I mean, in general, white probably rather has the pawn on f2 to guard the king. There are some advantages having the pawn on f4. So in certain cases, you can play f5 and trap the bishop on h7, which will be out of play. So, but it's a very committal decision. And I think Ding really didn't want to do that at all. Instead, he wants to focus his play on the queen side. So he continued here with the move a4. Black played rook c8. And Ding continues with the move a5. Grabbing space and keeping the options open, whether to break with a6 or maybe to play b5, challenging the base of the chain. Well, black here decides to play here this move b7, b6 himself. It's a very interesting move, and basically Gukesh is saying, I want to solve my problems immediately. Why do you play b6? Well, the main plan is to follow up here with the move c6, c5, grabbing more space in the center to attack the knight. And if you do get two pawns on c5 and d5, that's excellent news. I mean, you can come forward with these pawns, you can attack the queen, you can attack the knight. There are a lot of ideas, and black in general is quite comfortable in that case. So, of course, Ding understood that that's a possibility. He didn't want to allow black to play this move c5 with tempo, hitting the knight. So he dropped back with the knight to f3, which is a very solid move, but it has to be said that it's not really clear what white is playing for here. Because after knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, more pieces are coming off the board, and with the move d5, d4, black is aiming for more simplifications. He's attacking the knight on c3, and of course, taking the pawn on d4 is not very attractive. It does allow queen takes d4, and look at that backward pawn on the d file. It's isolated, it's vulnerable. Only black can be better in that case. So rather than taking the pawn, Ding decided to move the knight back to e2. Looks like a passive square, but you do hit the pawn on d4. And well, what is black going to do with that? I mean, you can support a pawn with a move like c5. You can also advance the pawn to d3. But I think that is exactly what Ding had been hoping for. This is not a good move. It was not played by Gukesh. For a good reason, because after something like knight g3, I really don't see where that pawn is going. It's nicely blocked by the pawn on d2. White can play around it, and eventually, I wouldn't be surprised if that pawn on d3 will eventually be wrapped up by white's pieces. So Gukesh is not playing too ambitiously here. He is just saying, okay, I managed to advance my d pawn. I'm going to take on e3, exchanging pawns. Also, the d-file is open, so white is forced now to take back with the pawn from d2. And you see there's one open file, and black has a majority on the queen side, which is a nice weapon sometimes. But it has to be said that, well, it's not very likely that a potential passed pawn is going to cause any problems. But the same can be said also about white's extra pawn in the center. It's just placed on e3, it's okay, but it's not really a threat to black's position. Well, black played here bishop e4, offering the exchange of bishops. First rook fd1, attacking the queen on d8, queen e7. Now, after bishop takes e4, knight takes e4, more pieces are getting exchanged. Pawn takes b6, a takes b6. So the a file has been opened now as well. But after knight c3, the last minor piece, the knights are coming off the board as well. Rook fd8 contesting the rook on the open file. So likely also rooks are coming off the board. Knight takes e4, queen takes e4. This is also an important lesson, guys, because before you do anything crazy, make sure that you never fall into any sort of back rank mates. h3 is a very useful move. Black played c5, creating a passed pawn. After rook takes d8, rook takes d8, pawn takes c5, b takes c5. As said, black has a passed pawn, but with the move rook c1, everything is nicely under control. You're controlling the c4 square, you're targeting the pawn on c5. Black played queen e5, queen c2, attacking the pawn on c5 one more time, but probably you cannot even take the pawn because there are always ideas based on a rook d1. And if you would have to take with the rook, then the queen on c5 can be hanging. Anyway, black didn't want to set a trap here. He just played rook d5 to protect the pawn from the side. And how is either side going to make progress here? Well, that's the big question. White played the move g3 so that also the h2 square is safe and you can move the king either to g2 or h2. Black has a lot of options. It's hard to say which move is best. Probably I would have gone for something like h5 and maybe g6, so you have a nice pawn structure on the king side, and it will be difficult for white to mobilize that extra pawn. But Gukesh played in a more ambitious way with something like f5. He is bringing up that pawn. At the same time, he's also weakening his own king a bit. So personally, it's not a move I do like, but it doesn't really change the evaluation. After king g2, king h7 was played, queen to c4. I mean, of course, black can consider here the exchange of queens with queen e4. It does force the exchange of queens because of that check, but queen d6 is also fine. And, well, black maintains control over that pawn on c5. White now has the chance here to play e4, forcing the exchange of one set of pawns. Rook e5 played, pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn, queen to e4, pinning the rook on f5. So you have to be careful if you just carelessly defend that rook, for instance, with something like queen f6. There's the idea to go g4, and then the rook will be lost. So black has to solve his problems in a concrete way with the move queen d5, pinning the queen on e4, forcing the exchange of queens. And after queen takes d5, rook takes d5, white brings up the king, king g6, king e4, attacking the rook. If rook goes to any square, you got to keep in mind that the pawn on c5 might be hanging. Therefore, rook d4 check. The king got to go back to e3 to keep the pawns on the king side well defended. Rook d5, rook is back defending the pawn. And now, after king e4, rook d4, king e3, rook d5, king e4, rook d4, players agree to a draw. The match is 2-2, another draw. And, well, it's interesting to see what is happening in this match. So far, both his white games, Ding Liren, played very solid and, you can say, maybe not very ambitious chess. Is this his match strategy? Is he tired? Is he still suffering from his health issues, mental health issues? It's hard to say what is going on. I mean, it's a big difference between his white games and his black games. And, well, both games with white were very solid. His black games were really, really sharp. And I would say that the momentum now in the match is for Gukesh. He is doing very fine with black, which is a very nice relief that for him that he survives his black games. He's not really tested in those games. And, well, having played a very impressive game in game 3, let's see what is going to happen in game 5 when he has another white. So it's 2-2. Anything can still happen. 8 more games to go. I hope you did like this video. If you haven't liked it yet, give it a like. Really appreciate all the support. And subscribe to the channel, guys. Really appreciate all the support. Thanks for that. And see you tomorrow again. Bye-bye.